When this tank first rolled off the production line, it was widely considered a disaster. Soldiers called it slow, clunky, and underpowered, while engineers fretted over constant mechanical failures that seemed impossible to fix. It didn't matter how good the concept looked on paper. The reality was harsh. The tank struggled on uneven terrain, often getting stuck in mud or rough ground, and its armor was too thin to withstand direct hits from German Panzer rounds. Early reports from frontline units were brutal, describing crews frustrated with breakdowns in the middle of combat and commanders questioning whether deploying the vehicle was worth the risk. Many historians would later write it off as one of the worst tanks of the war, a failure destined for scrapyards rather than battlefields. Yet, despite all the warnings and the low expectations, the Allies had no choice but to use it. Production numbers and strategic necessity forced its deployment. And in that crucible, something unexpected happened. While it wasn't perfect, the tank brought a level of resilience that no one had anticipated. Crews learned quickly how to manage its quirks, improvising repairs in the field and developing workarounds for its slow speed. Units that took the time to understand the machine found that it could still perform critical roles, holding defensive lines, supporting infantry, and even providing firepower in engagements where speed and maneuverability weren't the top priorities. Part of what made it survive where critics predicted failure was sheer toughness. Unlike some lighter, more sophisticated designs that broke down under stress, this tank's simplicity became an advantage. Its mechanical systems were easy to understand, easy to patch, and easier to keep running in difficult conditions. Crews could replace parts in the field with limited resources. And even when the engine struggled, the tank could often continue on, stubbornly refusing to be sidelined. In a way, its flaws became a hidden strength, forcing soldiers to adapt and innovate, turning frustration into ingenuity. Another factor was numbers. Even if a single vehicle seemed inferior to enemy tanks, having dozens or hundreds operating together allowed commanders to exploit tactics that emphasized coordination over individual superiority. Massed formations, combined arms strategies, and careful placement turned a seemingly weak tank into a formidable tool. Its reputation as a failure actually encouraged creativity. Crews learned to maximize its strengths and avoid exposing its vulnerabilities. By the time the tank saw significant action, the perception began to shift. Soldiers who once laughed at its specifications found themselves relying on it under fire. And stories of stubborn survival against heavier, more advanced German armor began to circulate. What had been dismissed as a liability slowly transformed into a symbol of resilience. Its journey from mocked prototype to battlefield stalwart showed that even the most criticized weapon could carve out a place in history. Not because it was perfect, but because it could endure, adapt, and, against all odds, perform when it counted most. What made this tank truly fascinating wasn't just that it survived its initial criticism. It was how soldiers and engineers transformed its weaknesses into unexpected advantages. On paper, it was slow, mechanically awkward, and poorly armed compared to German panzers. But in practice, crews quickly discovered that with a little ingenuity, this flawed machine could become a surprisingly versatile weapon. The key wasn't in making it perfect. It was in learning how to work with what it had and exploiting situations where its limitations didn't matter. Field modifications became a common practice almost immediately. Soldiers reinforced weak points in the armor, added extra storage for ammunition, and even experimented with improvised camouflage. In some units, additional gun shields were mounted, or engines tweaked to improve reliability just enough to handle long treks across rough terrain. Mechanics in the field became artists, taking what seemed like a broken-down tank and turning it into a vehicle that could survive harsh conditions and unexpected attacks. This creativity was essential because the tank couldn't rely on speed to escape danger, and its armor alone wasn't enough to shrug off enemy fire. Adaptation became the weapon's real strength. Tactics also evolved to fit the tank's characteristics. Commanders realized that sending it head-to-head against fast, heavily armed panzers was a recipe for disaster. Instead, it excelled in defensive positions, ambushes, and supporting infantry. Its slow pace, once a liability, allowed it to hold tight lines and provide consistent firepower where mobility was less important. Crews learned to coordinate their attacks, using terrain to their advantage. Narrow streets, forests, and uneven ground became natural shields that masked its weaknesses and amplified its utility. Another aspect of this transformation was how the tank's simplicity allowed it to endure punishment. While more advanced vehicles could be sidelined by minor mechanical failures, this model's straightforward design meant that even partially damaged tanks could keep moving. A broken gear or engine hiccup rarely stopped it entirely, which was invaluable in theaters where repair facilities were scarce. Crews adapted by carrying spare parts and learning field repairs, ensuring that a machine considered obsolete by some could remain operational when it mattered most. The adaptability didn't stop at mechanics or tactics. It extended to strategy and morale. Knowing that their vehicle could be modified and made reliable under the right circumstances gave soldiers confidence. It fostered a sense of ownership, turning frustration into ingenuity and fear into resourcefulness. Over time, this created a unique culture around the tank. A reputation not for being the fastest or most powerful, but for being dependable when clever minds guided it. By the end, what had been dismissed as a liability became a symbol of innovation under pressure. The worst tank of World War II had been reborn through ingenuity, adaptation, and tactical creativity. Its legacy shows that in war, success isn't always about perfection. It's about using what you have in the smartest way possible, turning limitations into opportunities, and proving that even a heavily criticized machine can leave an unforgettable mark on history. Despite its rocky start and harsh criticism, this tank began earning a reputation on the battlefield that no one could ignore. Its early failures were well known, but as crews learned to work with its quirks, it began to shine in moments that mattered most. It wasn't the flashiest or fastest tank, nor did it have the heaviest guns, but it had something rarer: resilience and adaptability that allowed it to survive and even thrive under conditions that would have sidelined other vehicles. Over time, it became clear that in certain scenarios, this worst tank could achieve feats that left soldiers and historians alike scratching their heads in amazement. The tank's legendary moments often came in situations where traditional tactics were impossible. When sent to defensive positions, it could hold choke points against superior enemy forces. Its relatively small size compared to heavier models made it easier to maneuver through streets, forests, and uneven terrain, where larger tanks would struggle or get stuck entirely. Crews quickly learned how to use the environment to their advantage, positioning the tank in places that amplified its strengths and minimized its weaknesses. In defensive operations, its durability allowed it to absorb punishment, giving infantry crucial support and sometimes preventing entire units from being overrun. One of the most remarkable aspects of its battlefield legend was how it performed under fire. Despite mechanical issues, many tanks of the era could be immobilized by minor damage. But this model's simple design often meant it could limp along after partial damage or minor engine failures. Crews became adept at improvising repairs on the spot, often keeping the tank operational long enough to make a difference in critical moments. Stories emerged of these tanks surviving direct hits, continuing to fire, and retreating only when absolutely necessary. This resilience earned it a reputation not as a fragile machine, but as a stubborn, unyielding force that refused to give up. The tank's unexpected effectiveness also created morale-boosting moments for Allied soldiers. Units that had once mocked the vehicle came to rely on it in engagements, sharing stories of close calls where the tank turned the tide. It wasn't just the tactical advantage, it was the psychological impact. Soldiers knew that even a vehicle branded the worst could hold the line when other options were limited. This boosted confidence, fostered camaraderie, and made the tank a symbol of perseverance and resourcefulness in situations where the odds were stacked against them. Even enemies took notice. German commanders learned that underestimating this vehicle could be a serious mistake. In ambushes or defensive battles, its presence disrupted plans, forced enemy troops to slow down, and created unexpected challenges on the battlefield. Over time, it gained nicknames, almost as if the crews themselves were acknowledging that this once maligned machine had proven its worth in ways that no one could have predicted. By the time the war progressed, the tank's reputation had transformed. It was no longer remembered as a failure or a liability. Instead, it became a symbol of ingenuity, determination, and the unpredictable ways that even flawed machines can achieve legendary status. Its story shows that battlefield success is not only about specifications or raw power. It's also about persistence, creativity, and using every advantage available, no matter how small. This worst tank, through grit and clever use, had earned its place in history. Even after the guns fell silent and the war ended, the story of this tank refused to fade into obscurity. Its reputation as the worst tank of World War II had long since been challenged on the battlefield. And now, decades later, it continued to capture the imagination of historians, military enthusiasts, and ordinary people fascinated by tales of resilience and ingenuity. Its legacy wasn't measured in speed or firepower, but in the lessons it left behind about adaptation, determination, and the unpredictable nature of warfare. One of the most important aspects of its legacy is how it influenced future tank design and military strategy. Engineers and military planners studied its strengths and weaknesses, realizing that simplicity and reliability could sometimes outweigh flashy features or heavy armor. The ability to endure harsh conditions, survive partial damage, and remain functional when resources were limited became a guiding principle in later designs. The lessons learned from field modifications and tactical improvisations informed how armies approached vehicle production, showing that even a flawed design could be a strategic advantage if crews were trained to use it effectively. The tank's story also inspired countless documentaries, books, and museum exhibits, turning it into more than just a weapon. It became a symbol. It wasn't celebrated for perfection, but for perseverance. People came to admire the way soldiers and engineers refused to write it off, instead finding ways to turn flaws into strengths and limitations into tactical opportunities. Its presence in educational programs and military studies demonstrates how a machine, initially dismissed as a failure, can provide valuable lessons on leadership, creativity, and adaptability. Cultural impact played a role too. In films, historical reenactments, and even video games, the tank became an emblem of the underdog. Its story reminds us that war isn't always about the most powerful or technologically advanced weapon. It's about how tools are used, how people adapt under pressure, and how ingenuity can overcome seemingly insurmountable odds. This narrative resonates because it's deeply human. It's about finding strength in the unexpected, and proving that even a machine mocked by experts can inspire courage and innovation. Beyond its symbolic meaning, the tank also left a tangible mark. Many of the surviving vehicles are preserved in museums across the world, allowing visitors to see firsthand the machine that defied expectations. Historians use these tanks to demonstrate mechanical innovation, battlefield strategy, and the daily realities of wartime engineering. Restoration projects often uncover the field modifications soldiers made, providing insight into the creativity and problem-solving that turned a struggling vehicle into a functional, sometimes legendary, combat tool. Ultimately, the legacy of this tank proves that history is not written by first impressions. A design initially labeled as the worst became a case study in resilience, adaptability, and ingenuity. Its legend endures because it challenges assumptions, showing that even the most criticized machine can achieve greatness when met with determination, strategy, and clever use. For anyone interested in the untold stories of World War II, it stands as a powerful reminder that success often comes from persistence and creativity, not just raw power. This tank's unlikely rise from ridicule to legend is a testament to the unpredictable nature of war, and the remarkable resourcefulness of those who fought with it.